Excellent. So, I'll get started then. I assume everyone's in the right room. You've all been sitting here waiting 20 minutes for me to fix the screen. So I'm going to talk about Power BI and source control today. A quick introduction, my name's Craig Porteus. I'm a senior data engineer. I work for Incremental Group, who are here sponsoring today. And they're upstairs if you want to go see them. There's lots of suites if you want to try your hand at the competition they have. I've worked in data for about 13 years now. I'm the Glasgow Data User Group co-leader, and I also founded the Data Scotland conference, which is in September on the 18th this year in this venue. Hopefully not with this HDMI connection though. So if you want to get in touch with me, my website and Twitter handle are up there, and all the code that I'll talk about and any of the examples and reference material will be on my GitHub page, which is there as well, so you can find it all there. Just before I start, as a conference organizer myself, I just want to highlight that sponsors are the most important thing when it comes to conferences. Without them, these things just don't take place. They support conferences and make sure the event's free for everybody to attend. So please go speak to them, make it worth their while to come here. It does mean a lot. So to get started with, I wanted to kind of highlight or talk about who this session's actually for. Power BI is one of those tools that sort of bridges the gap between what I see as these two camps of your business users within an organization and your developers in IT. It's a tool that Microsoft intended to be easy to pick up, easy to use, and kind of grow organically within a business. So it makes your life a little bit harder when it comes to governance and support. So for this talk, I kind of wanted to capture anyone who might sit across either of these camps. So there's an idea of a couple of different roles or job titles that people might have. But basically, you could summarize all of them as BI creators. So anyone that's creating content on Power BI, this is relevant to them. What I want to cover today is I'll talk about, or how I break that down is I'll talk about source control, just a quick introduction, then why it's relevant to you, why you should know about it, how it works with Power BI or how it doesn't work, essentially, and then what are the options, what can you do. So starting off with, what is source control? And this is your standard Wikipedia definition, but the highlight here is that it's the management of changes, and that's really what's most important. It doesn't matter if it's an application you're developing, it's code you're writing, it's a document, it's a book you're writing with someone, or Power BI reports. It's the management of those changes, making sure there's backups of what you've got. You might recognize some of these logos. Git is a type of source control. GitHub, GitLab are services that use Git as source control. If you don't worry. I won't go into too much detail in this. There's days and days that you could talk about source control. But to kind of think about how it's relevant to us as Power BI or BI creators, it's really got 4 key points that you need to consider. The first one being backups. So source control is important because it gives you backups of your content. And this might be second nature to most people, but some people still store things on their laptops without any sort of cloud storage or anything like that. So source control is about your backups of that content. It's also about change history. So how do you track what's changed when, what edits people have made to content, to Power BI reports, and how's that kind of managed, and what visibility you have of that, essentially. You've then got collaboration, and this is a little bit harder when it comes to Power BI, as you probably know. There's no way, it's not like a Word document or an Excel document where you can have multiple people through Office 365 contributing on the same document. Power BI doesn't have that, hopefully yet, but that's something to consider, and it gives you a central location to share files, so you're not having to pull something off of your local hard drive to share with someone if they wanted to contribute to it. And then lastly, you've got CI/CD, which, if you're not aware of, it basically means continuous integration, continuous delivery, and it's about how you update that content in an efficient way, and how that's tested, developed, and then pushed out to the users in a production environment. Now, it's currently not possible to do any CI/CD with Power BI, but if you missed the announcement at Ignite back in November, they did announce that Power BI was getting lifecycle management tools soon, hopefully. So kind of moving on and thinking about why you should care about source control, I can really fit it into these two categories, essentially. So you've got ad hoc scenarios and you've got your expected scenarios. Thinking about ad hoc scenarios, you could lose your laptop. So if you're working on content and it's solely on one device, you could break it in half, you could leave it in here and I'll steal it. There's lots of things that could happen to a single device. So it's about making sure that you've got a reliable place to store that content. Then you've got considerations around going off sick, not being available within the organization. Has the rest of your team, has the rest of your department or the business got access to the things you've been developing, the reports that you've been deploying? And then the one that I like the best is when someone deletes a workspace, which is recoverable, but generally needs a service ticket, so you could have an outage of days or weeks where content isn't available to people. So thinking more about expected scenarios, you've got holidays, everyone should be taking a holiday. You've got the possibility that you might get a new job. How's that content then shared with the rest of your team? How do they know what you've been working on, the changes you've made? Do they have access to those files without having to pull them down from the Power BI the Power BI service? And then the opposite of that, of how do you integrate new members of a team? Do they have access to that content? Can they get to the what they need? So hopefully, or you've probably all seen this type of source control. You've got one file, you make a copy of it because you want to change something, but you're not really sure if you're going to keep it. And then, oh, actually that becomes the final copy, but you've got a version 2 because you've changed the way the business works or something happens, and then that's the final version 2 final. Yeah, don't do that. And this isn't a problem that's unique to Power BI, it's a problem that you have across any sort of file types. And if I look at my desktop, which is hidden thankfully, you'll probably see similar scenarios where it's just been, let's just do this quickly. Avoid that at all costs. So if we kind of move on and think about how that applies to Power BI. So that's a kind of quick tour of source control and why you should be thinking about it. How that applies to Power BI is a difficult one because Power BI sits in the middle of these two theoretical camps, hopefully. You've got your business users on one side and you've got your developers in IT, and it's often very different roles, very different jobs that they do. And you've got Power BI in the middle where there's no source control management built into it. It's not like a developer tool where you have that capability built in, like Visual Studio Code, Azure Data Studio, for example. You don't have that same freedom to bring your content under source control. Then you've got business users who may not know or care about source control. It's not part of their job, and that's fine. That's not a problem. It's not something that they've maybe had to think about in the past. And then you've got your developers or your IT department where they can put in as much processes as they want to manage the content that they're delivering. But at the end of the day, if they're not capturing everything, is this really a solution? Is it really something that is going to work? So thinking about what we can do here, in my mind, there's two separate approaches. You can use tools to get what you need, or you can use processes. If we think about tools, I have access to a sales workspace, your marketing workspace, finance, and then I've got my own one. I can just do something to take a backup of all those workspaces and all the reports and content within them, and that's fine. That's me working with tools, working around the users. I don't care what people are deploying or when they're deploying them, but I'm going to make sure I've got a backup of all that content. And if you're a Power BI administrator, you'll also have access to everyone else's personal workspace. which is great because then if they're deploying things to that workspace, testing things out, you'll have all of that content. You don't need to worry about them going off for a couple of days or a week and then someone asking about that report they've been working on and all of these kind of problems that follow on from it. So you can take that shotgun approach of let's just capture everything. It's not going to give you your change history, but it's going to give you your backups. It's going to give you the ability to collaborate on files that would normally be locked away in someone's machine. The alternative is a deployment process. So you tell people that to deploy to Power BI, they have to go through this specific process. They have to send the file to some specific team or person that then has to get approved for pushing it to Power BI. They have to give reasons of what they've changed and why they've changed it. But you just know that that little button on Power BI that says publish is just going to be too tempting to just hit that and forget all of that process. Because at the end of the day, there's different job types. People are doing different things, and you can't force them to take on that deployment process. So the best approach is always to work around the people rather than change what people do. And that's the approach I'm going to concentrate on today. So how do we do it? There's three main technical options that range in complexity to kind of work around what Power BI can't do itself. The first one being basics, and I hope everybody already does this. I'm not going to name and shame anyone by asking you to put up hands, but there's cloud storage, which is your OneDrive, Dropbox, SharePoint Online, any other cloud storage that's available as well. You've then got Power Automate, which allows you to easily automate tasks and build in a process around how you capture your reports. And at the end, you've got PowerShell, where you can interact with the Power BI API, but you require PowerShell knowledge. So they sort of vary from business users can easily do this themselves all the way up to this requires a developer and programmer. And a lot of these elements or parts of these solutions will require some sort of administrator or some sort of admin or business involvement to get these set up. So if you are a user within a team, there may not be a lot you can do to implement these, but having the awareness that these options are out there is just as important. So starting off with cloud storage, you've got, as I said, you've got OneDrive, you've got lots of options here. There's key things to remember about cloud storage is it's not real source control, it's version history. You've got all of those versions of files as they're saved, but it isn't proper source control. You're not getting that granularity of exactly what's changed between each of these versions. If you're using your local OneDrive or your personal OneDrive, sorry, or personal Dropbox account, you've still got backup silos. There's another copy of that held securely if I snap my laptop in half, which I felt like doing a minute ago. But at the end of the day, if you're not available, someone in the business is not going to be able to access that content, or if they are, it's going to take them possibly hours and days to be able to get into your OneDrive location if it's a corporate one, for example. There's some benefits around your Power BI workspace OneDrive location, where it's a central location, and if you deploy reports to it, they'll automatically be deployed to Power BI, which kind of gives you a little bit of an advantage in your deployment processes. But one thing to bear in mind is if you're using that, it's only, you need to set it up manually for any of the version 2 workspaces. It's not kind of built in inherently. So demo time, let's see what that looks like. You probably already know what source control looks like, but I'll just talk about the kind of specific advantages. So starting off with OneDrive. So this is your OneDrive location. You've got... Oh, I don't want to touch this now. I need a separate mouse just in case. Just in case. Yeah, okay. I'm a little bit paranoid. So yeah, you've got your Power BI backups. Everyone see that okay? Yeah. Yeah. So you've got your Power BI backups folder, for example. I've been pulling these into OneDrive on a daily basis. I've got a list of all my workspaces and all of the reports inside them. I can click on the ellipses here and it gives me version history. So that gives me a full list of all the versions for that report, the times that they were taken, the version number. The last documentation I was able to find talking about OneDrive versions and how many versions it will actually store of a file mentioned that it would store 100 versions, and that was back in 2017, and there's not really been anything concrete since. So that's shown 144. There's another report that I checked yesterday that was up at 256. I have no idea why one's higher than the other or what the kind of logic around it is, but it's something to consider that you've got a little bit of ambiguity of how many versions this is going to store. These go back to quite a while. Yeah, so October last year, so that's a long time, and I've been taking backups every day, which is definitely overkill. But you've got the ability within here to restore back to specific files or open that specific version. But as you can imagine, unless you know that on February the 20th, you made this change to that report and you're writing that somewhere else, that's going to be a needle in a haystack if you want to find, if you want to roll back a report to a specific point or find a specific change that was made and back it out.
It's a very big haystack. I think it's up to 500 versions a day.
Is it 500 a day? Oh, I'll need to try setting this up to run every minute then, see how that goes. Yeah, so you're probably well covered then. So that's fine. So that's your basic OneDrive, that's your kind of bare minimum.
Craig, how did you set that up? So it's automated, isn't it? So
yeah, so I go on to talk about the tools that I've used to kind of push into that. But if you were manually like dragging them into OneDrive, then you've got those kind of that number of versions. But I'll go on to talk about how I'd set that up with like PowerShell and Power Automate as well. So kind of moving one step up the ladder, you've got SharePoint. So it's a central location. It gives you that collaboration, gives you your backups, and it gives you a little bit. It gets you a little bit closer to your version history. So here's a report that I've saved into SharePoint. Again, I can go to the ellipses and I can go to version history. And looks slightly different, but we've got the date time, we've got the version number, who saved it, and we've got the ability to add a comment as well. So you can add a little bit of detail. It's not great. It doesn't give you the exact changes where you might, in normal version history, if you change the size of a font or something, that's going to be captured exactly of this is the definition of the file, and this font was changed from 10 to 12, for example. So it gets you a little bit closer. But that's essentially cloud storage. I could go through a number of examples in like Dropbox and things, but they all kind of work the same, essentially. I'm tempting fate by coming in and out of this. Yeah, there we go. Long pause in the middle. So that's your cloud storage. The next thing I want to talk about is Power Automate. So how do we capture these automatically? So the cloud storage you might be saving the source files before you deploy them in cloud storage, which is your bare minimum. And you can stack these up. You can do all of these if you want. Power Automate is about the process of actually capturing those reports, your reports and everyone else's essentially. Now, although Power Automate has the ability to use the Power BI connector that's built in, it doesn't have the functionality we need to be able to capture the reports and export them. So we need to build a custom connector, which then has a little asterisk next to it that's a premium cost. So there's going to be cost attached to it, or there could be cost attached to it depending on your Office 365 subscription. So I need to set up a custom connector, and to do that I need to create a developer app within Power BI. So that's by going to dev.powerbi.com/apps. I can define exactly what permissions that app should have. From there, I pull that app into Microsoft Flow, Power Automate, and then I grant it permissions in Azure to say, I want this app to be able to pull this information back. Now, I don't go into detail about it here, but Ida Bergham's got an amazing blog post that talks about exactly that, and that's what I used as a guide to set that up. She uses it in an approval process for reports, but her guide will give you exactly what you need to be able to set up the custom connector, and then you can basically create activities under the custom connector to do whatever you want based on what the Power BI API can do. So if you only wanted to do what we're doing here, so like getting workspaces, exporting reports, getting reports, then that's all it needs to do. But if you wanted to do everything that the Power BI API can do, you can pull all of those options in as well. But I'll go into more detail about that in a minute. So once I've done that, I've got my Power BI API custom connector. And that's the piece that will generally require some sort of technical administrator to set that up and grant that permission across the entire company, essentially, within Azure. But once I have this is when it becomes a lot easier to use from a business user perspective, which is where Power Automate's aimed. I create a flow with a trigger, like a recurrence, for example. So I want this to just happen on a daily basis. I want to just take that shotgun approach again, do this daily, so that I've got the bare minimum of all the reports that are deployed. I then use my Power BI API custom connector to retrieve all workspaces. And this works better if you're a Power BI administrator because you'll have access to all workspaces. If you're not, you'll only be able to retrieve reports from the ones that you have access to. So once I do that, I then look through all the reports in that workspace. So that's what the activity looks like there. And then for each of those reports, I'm going to export them. And in this example, I just pull it out to OneDrive. Then I'll look back to the next report, do that again till I come to the end of the workspace, look back to the next workspace, and just go round in a circle till I've got everything within Power BI that I have access to. So as I say, that's very much a shotgun approach, but it gives you your kind of bare minimum. So I'll run through what that looks like if that decides to come up at any point. So who here's used the Power Automate before? Most people? Okay, cool. So yeah, this is what it looks like for the configuration page. We've got a little bit of detail on the actual flow. We've got all the run history, whether it's succeeded or failed. We've got the connections along the right-hand side of what I'm actually connected to. But if I go into edit, you can see exactly how this works. So we've got the recurrence at the start. We then set the workspace name variable just so that we can use that to pass into the reports or pass to the Power BI API. We're then going to pull back all workspaces. That doesn't need any sort of parameters, so it just pulls back everything I have access to. We parse the JSON for that, and then that's when we start to loop. So we loop through each of those workspaces. We get the name, we get all the reports, parse the JSON again, and then we loop through each report. And for each report, we export it, and we create the Power BI file within OneDrive. And it's really as simple as that, and that's what was populating that OneDrive location just on a daily basis. So that gives you your bare minimum. That's the shotgun approach. And you can build a lot into this as well. Power Automate's quite powerful, where you can kind of put approval processes in this or notifications and things, and capture specific reports or just look at specific workspaces as well. So that's your kind of basic setup with Power Automate, but as you can probably imagine, that doesn't really scale all that well. If you've got 1,000 reports and maybe only 2 or 3 are changing on a daily basis or a weekly basis, then you're capturing a lot of information that's going to be exactly the same for a long period of time. So how does that work at scale, or how can we do that at scale? So we need to kind of take a different angle from it. There is an API for Office 365, and there's a webhook attached to it that allows you to trigger your Power Automate flow whenever anything happens within Office 365. we can then look exactly at what's actually happened there and capture anything that looks like a Power BI report's been published. So there's another great article which I used as a guide by Steve Howard, who works for Microsoft, and he goes into detail about how to set that up. His main objective with it is to use it to approve or reject reports. So when someone deploys a report, he's capturing that report, sending it to someone for approval. If they reject it, it deletes the report from the workspace. So that's an option if you wanted to set that up. You can follow his guide. But the way I use it is we use the API webhook, which I should say as well, Microsoft are sort of steering people away from using webhooks. So certainly it will still work, and it's not something that will be deprecated anytime soon, but they are, their general advice appears to be to move away from using webhooks. We use that to trigger the report based on, or trigger the flow based on a report being published. And again, we're using our API connector. And we grab that published report and export it to OneDrive or any sort of cloud storage or anywhere we want, really. So that's much more of a targeted approach. And this is something that you could then build in the process of saying, capture this report, send it back to the person that deployed it and ask for a comment, and then ask them to submit that, and then you can store that information maybe in a database or in a SharePoint list, for example. So that gets you very much a workaround for source control, but it gets you some sort of control over the content that's being deployed.
But this is done on command. The other one was done on schedule, so that was done daily, wasn't it?
Yeah. So the other one's set in a recurrence, just daily or however you want, and this will only be triggered when something happens in Office 365. The drawbacks with that are, it's not a specific Power BI management API, so it's triggered by everything in Office 365. So I'll show you, like looking at the history of this one, you can see 14 minutes ago, 3 hours ago, 5 hours ago, 6 hours ago. So it's triggered a lot more often. And then you start needing to think about trigger limits within Power Automate and whether there's costs attached to that as well, and what kind of limitations there are. If you've got a busy Office 365 tendency, then that starts to become a little bit of a risk to consider. But the way this is set up...
In the trigger, you need to see if it is Power BI and not Word or anything.
Yeah. So you could have this set up to do other things as well. So the way it's set up is you start with that webhook being received, set up some variables to allow me to connect to Office 365. We use a get token to authenticate, and then we get that log event. So the webhook will trigger and give us an event ID. We then go back in and pull all the details for that event. And then that's the first thing we do is we've got a condition that says the workload has to be equal to Power BI and the operation has to be equal to import. So you can be triggered on other things within Power BI, people running reports and things as well. And then if that's true, then all we do is get that report based on the detail from the event, parse the JSON, and then if there are multiple reports that have been deployed at the same time, or within that bulk of management changes, we grab them and go through them one by one, export the report, create the file in SharePoint, and just for fun, I've tweeted about it as well. So I'm hoping this actually worked because I've done this. Ah, there we go. Nope. Yeah, so 43 minutes ago. So set that up to say, I love Microsoft Flow, which is now Power Automate. Schoolboy error. Craig deployed Scottish Weather to Demos workspace at Scottish Summit and gives you the location of the backup. So you might not want to tweet about all reports being deployed, but that could be something that is tied into some other service within Power Automate to say this team has deployed something to this workspace and send it to some sort of administrator account or a group so people have wider visibility of it. And so that's one of the key benefits of Power Automate is you've got that flexibility to go, this is what I'm doing, or this is the core of what I'm doing, but I want to tie that into a wider ecosystem or a wider process.
I'm interested still in how often that trigger would
Yeah, in theory, yes, but
Yes.
the way it's triggered, the webhook is not triggered on each individual event. It's triggered on a grouping of events. Whether that's every couple of minutes or couple of hours is a little bit of a grey area under the hood with Office 365. There's nothing that explicitly says this will trigger every minute and it will have a collection of X number of events, essentially. So you do get some discrepancy. When I've tried this in the past for the demo, I've started the session and I've deployed that report, and by this point in the session, it's not went through the process because it's taken like 40 minutes for that event to eventually be triggered by the webhook and kind of go through. So you do have a little bit of a timing disparity there, but it generally is within about an hour, but they keep it quite vague because I think it's all kind of load balanced essentially. So if you've got like a lot of documents and things, the Power Automate will be triggered and there'll be a lot of content within that event, but because we're doing that if condition of just look at this, then we're just pulling out
No,
what we need.
I was just thinking about the number of events, and of course you charge per event.
Yeah.
Or per trigger, I should say. Per trigger, so that could be running constantly on Word and Excel spreadsheet updates that are being done in the organization. I don't care about it in this case.
Yeah.
So that's my thinking.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in my opinion, they do need to separate that out. A blanket Office 365 one shouldn't cover services like Power BI and things like that. It should be kind of segregated into specific API webhooks or management APIs. But that's the way they currently have it, and I guess it's more of a you'd need to just try it and see if it's a manageable amount. Certainly, the tests I do on are my own tenancy, so. Generally, I'll only be doing one or two things, but it's triggering based on those kind of windows and when it's capturing those events. So it might end up triggering the same amount for you, but the content of your events would be 400 events rather than just one at a time.
Yeah, but if it is one trigger, I pay for one trigger. So
Yeah.
Going through and using GIFs, so that there might be two extra actions.
Something worth trying out. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear if you have success with it or not. Cool. And so, moving on to our third option, PowerShell. This kind of steps up quite a bit in terms of the skill requirements. Who here works with PowerShell or has tried PowerShell before? A few people? Okay, so with PowerShell, it's fairly easy to get started, especially if kind of things and scripts are already pre-built, and all this content will be on my GitHub page, so feel free to have a go at it. Essentially, we're doing the same thing as the way Power Automate would work. So we are using the Power BI management module, which is a module created by Microsoft and kind of contributed to by the community, but it's something that's freely available. We bring that into a tool like Visual Studio Code, so any sort of IDE would work to be able to edit that. We then authenticate to Power BI, so that pops up with a prompt to say authentication, which is your normal Azure Active Directory, and then we can start calling the API with pretty much anything we want. There's a couple of built-in functions within the module that make it a lot simpler to do certain things, but the API itself covers an enormous wealth of capabilities that you can still use the module to kind of get to, but it's a bit more involved. And from there, you can tie this into CI/CD processes, you can push out to Git source control, local cloud storage, other kind of automation, any sort of process as well. So your capabilities of PowerShell are a lot more, a lot wider, essentially. So I'll show you what that looks like. There we go. Is that big enough? Okay, so essentially this is my PowerShell script. The first thing you would want to do is just install module Microsoft Power BI MGMT, and that's a wrapper module for some sub modules that contain all of the commands that you can do. but the first command we're actually going to run is just login -Power BI. So running that pops up with this prompt, which is your standard Microsoft prompt. It's detected I've already got accounts attached, which is great. So I'll click on the one I need, and that's me authenticated. So you can see that just gives me a quick summary of the tenant ID, the username that's authenticated, and I'm ready to go. So what we want to do with it isn't built in as a function within PowerShell, within the PowerShell module. So what I'm going to do is get my access token. So this is a way for us just to get the actual authentication token that Microsoft provides to say you're allowed to interact with Power BI. I'll get that, and I'm just going to build that into an authentication header because I need to call the API manually, so I pass all these things to the API. And then I'm essentially doing the same thing that I did within Power Automate. I've got my first API call, which is going to return all of the groups. And then I call it here and attach all those group details to this variable workspaces. I'm then going to loop through that workspaces and pull out the ID, the name, and then I'm going to test if that path exists locally. So I'm just pulling these out to my local machine using that variable to say, does that workspace name path exist? And then the next API call is putting that workspace ID in and then pulling back reports for that workspace. And then same again, I loop through each of these reports. And then my last API call is for that specific report ID, I'm going to export it, do my API call, and then push it out to a file. So if I run all of that, let me see. I'll delete everything in here so you can see it coming in. So yeah, that starts to fill with the workspaces that I've set up within Power BI, and that'll pull down all the reports. It'll also create workspaces that are empty as well. So whereas Power Automate only deals with the ones that have reports in them, this will pull back everything. Even if it's an empty workspace, it'll just pull back the folder. And that's, you can kind of work away with that how you need to. So that sounds great, but as you've probably seen, I had to actually physically log in to Power BI, which is no good if you want to automate the process. You don't want someone sitting there having to hit the login button all the time. So there's different ways you can automate this. Microsoft provide the ability to do it with what they call service principal accounts. You need a lot of admin rights to set them up, and there are some drawbacks with them. A way that I found that's quite successful and kind of meets security requirements is by using an Azure automation runbook. Again, all of this is in the code within GitHub if you want to try it out. But essentially, we're doing the same thing. Set up the developer app for Power BI. Then we create an Azure automation runbook. We pull our PowerShell code in. We can save my credentials within the keys within the runbook. So they're securely saved within Microsoft. If they get lost or hacked, that's Microsoft's problem. We then call the API, and we've got the same output and involvement there and capabilities. So there's a full blog post on how to set that up and how I've used it on my site there, if you want to check it out. I'm kind of running over, but there's another thing I want to show you, but in summary, the three main options we covered. You've got cloud storage. It's simple, it's easy to implement, but there are drawbacks for it. It's not really source control. It's not really an enterprise solution. It's probably your bare minimum. Forget about specific to Power BI. This is something you should be doing for all your files anyway. You've then got Power Automate in the middle. It's easy to use. It is still quite powerful. It's relevant to the business. You can kind of tie in different processes, but the initial setup is difficult. You might need some sort of buy-in from the business to do it. You've got some load restrictions, and you have some financial considerations as well with your premium connectors. And then finally, you've got PowerShell, which is versatile. It's the most powerful, and the drawbacks being that you need to know how to write PowerShell, or at least run it and how to debug it if there's any issues. So I'm hoping you maybe noticed the asterisk at the beginning on the first slide next to the number 3. There is a fourth option. It is a paid solution, Power BI Sentinel. I didn't want to dwell too much on it. I don't get paid to talk about it, but it's a tool I've used, and in my opinion, it's absolutely fantastic. It ticks all the boxes for what you need to do, and a lot of the things I've talked about here, and in my experience, it's the only way to do proper change tracking. So they take copies of the reports as they're being backed up. They strip them all open and get a full view of the content within those reports and compare it to the last version. So that allows them to say, yes, you've changed that header from font 10 to font 12. And you can start to add information to that, and you can roll back to different versions. There's full lineage that's built in there as well, which is coming to Power BI, but it's already within Power BI Sentinel. One of the main benefits I found was as soon as I turned it on, it asked me for a connection string for blob storage. Once I set that up, it was a case of automatically back up all of your workspaces and all of your reports, or untick the ones you don't want to automatically be monitored. And I get notifications for when they're backed up and kind of stored as well. It also has an auto documentation feature which will spit out all of the measures and things you've used, the M code and everything. I don't think I've got time for a demo, but if you catch me afterwards, I'd be happy to kind of show you how that works. So in summary, there's no golden bullet. I hope this wasn't too much of a clickbaity session, that you can't actually do source control in Power BI yet, but there's ways to get around it. You could implement a business process, but it only gets you halfway there, only gets you some of the way. You're going to get people that will try and work around it. If you change the way people work, they'll always find a way to work around it. There's a technical solution, but it also doesn't get you all the way there. You don't get the same change history without asking people what they've changed or using a paid solution. So the real solution is probably a mixture of both. Some way to make it simple that people just follow the same processes, like with the Power Automate using the management API webhook, of we capture it and then we go back and ask them to just add more information to it. And at least that's something that needs to kind of work until, or if Microsoft put proper kind of source control or the ability to implement that within Power BI. And that's everything I had, so thank you very much. Is there any questions at all? No? Excellent. Cheers. It's about 5 minutes over.